Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's 13 days to go before Election Day, and this is your countdown. Hello again, you're watching Decision 2018 Countdown. So 2 weeks before the election, we're going to be inviting various guests to the studio to talk about topics that are pertinent to the election. Today we have Lesley Comissiong. Welcome, Lesley.
Thank you.
So you're probably familiar with Lesley. You've seen her on TV2 various times. Her and Dr. Alexander Randall were doing a commentary show before. So you're very familiar with her. She's a political strategist. Let me tell you a little bit about Lesley. She's a product of the VI Public Schools. She got her Bachelor of Arts degree from Utica College of Syracuse University, and then after graduating from college, she immediately enrolled in her first stateside campaign, and that was on the re-election bid of Senator Harry Reid.
Correct.
And then she has since worked several gubernatorial elections, congressional, state, and local races around the country and also here in the Virgin Islands. And she's the daughter of Gilbert Comissiong Sr. and Valdivia Blyden.
Yes.
And she's married to Pierre Duclos. So Lesley, welcome. You're not, you're not a foreigner to the studio, so I hope you're feeling comfortable right
Absolutely now. Feels like coming back home.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to discuss several things throughout the show. In this first segment, we are going to talk about past and current elections in terms of the senatorial race. So looking at the last election, we're talking about 2016,
sure.
Right? 2016 and 2018. What are the major differences that strike you?
Well, first of all, the number of individuals that are registered to vote.
Right.
Carolyn Fox set a very aggressive role of having 51,000 or 50,000 voters in the territory. She actually exceeded that goal by 1,112 registered voters, which is actually outstanding.
That's
considering
great.
that there has been a downturn in participation over the last couple of elections. We especially took a dip in 2014. There were several legal matters that challenged the election system, and just general distrust by individuals of the election system, which some of it still persists, but based on the early voting numbers we're seeing in turnout so far, it looks like Virgin Islanders may have gotten over those challenges. These new machines have been used in a couple of elections now, so there's more familiarity with them, and so therefore I think that we are going to return back to our traditional percentage turnouts that we see. Now, when comparing elections, political scientists tend to compare like elections to like elections. So, we would look at Senate years that are off Senate years, you compare off Senate years together, and then gubernatorial years you compare to gubernatorial years, just for the viewers out there.
Okay, so what are the striking differences? I know that we talked about various candidates earlier. We have Marvin Blyden winning in the 2016 race. He was at the top of that list, and then he dropped down in the primaries for the 2018. And then we have newcomers actually dominating the Senate races for 2018. What does that tell you?
Well, it shows me that the incumbency right now is a liability for members of the legislature. I think that there is a general wave of change, and some people are, I talked on my local talk show about the fact that this is called the pink wave because two of the top vote getters were women, and there has been a historic number of women running for public office around the country, and I think the pink wave has hit the Virgin Islands. And so we see that we have females that are expected again to perform at the top of the finish in the Senate race, and we also have some new strong contenders as well in the Senate race on both St. Croix and St. John. Some new faces to politics in Allison Digazon, you have Carla Joseph, you have Alma Francis Heiliger, all very strong female candidates.
And then we're not just looking at on the Democratic side. There are also independents that people seem to be rooting for. On St. Croix, one of those is Genevieve Whitaker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Genevieve, very well educated. Virgin Islander with a vast range of experience. She also worked for the election systems at one point, I believe, as a deputy supervisor of the system. So very familiar with Virgin Islands politics. I'm sure she's poured over these numbers, and she probably, if anything, can launch a very strategic campaign looking at the areas that she needs to get votes in. So she kind of has an edge having worked for the system and launching her campaign.
And then looking at the actual results of the primaries, both on St. Thomas and St. Croix, the senatorial races, we're looking at very narrow margins between the 7th placer and the 8th placer. And then, you know, and both for St. Thomas and St. Croix, Jean Ford is like a few votes ahead of Kent Bernier, and then on St. Croix, you have Oakland Benta, who's just literally 7 votes ahead of Neville James. Does that bode well or not for those who are kind of hanging in there?
Well, that's actually historic in the Virgin Islands. If you talk to former senators that have been in the legislature, they always tell you they feel most comfortable 5th place and up. If you have a fifth place or higher finish, it's a stronger finish. You know, you can kind of take a sigh of relief, because those 6th, 7th, and 8th place finishers, they are reliant on absentee ballots, provisional ballots that have to be counted, and early vote numbers that come out as well that may not be counted on election night. So you tend to be a little bit more nervous, but it also proves the adage, every vote counts.
Now, this is a largely Democratic race, but we also have ICM candidates running. We have not Robert Moorhead, I believe it's Alma Francis Heiliger on St. Thomas, as well as Smokey Fred on St. Thomas. Do you think that the fact that they're affiliated with ICM will give them a little bit of an edge over the other fully independent candidates?
Well, possibly, but the number of ICM registered voters, in the territory is fairly negligible. I mean, when you look at the range of registered voters, of course, the largest population is registered Democrats. There are 35,000 plus registered Democrats in the territory. The next largest block are non-affiliated independent voters, and so you would think that the edge would go to those independent voters. Not that they're associated with any particular party, but they have a larger block of voters to select from. I think the ICM label in this case, I would be neutral on whether it's a help or hindrance. I think they definitely get the number of voters. I think it's 2,000 plus or 1,800 about voters that are registered ICMs, if I'm not mistaken. I think they naturally get those voters, and so that's a good base going into the election to have.
And then finally, before we take a break, last senatorial election, we had a problem with eligibility with Kevin Rodriguez, which, you know, when he was disqualified, allowed Janelle Soro, an independent, to get in. Do you foresee some kind of issue like that coming up?
That's a really interesting question. I think that it all depends. That's the answer to that. I think that challenge, as you very well know, to Rodriguez's eligibility came after the place of finish. So I would say I won't be surprised if it happens again. If there's something someone has out there that they've been holding in pocket and waiting for election day to see exactly where they finish, they may bring it forth afterwards.
All right, so we're going to take a little break. We'll be right back. You're watching Decision 2018 Countdown, and we're here with Lesley Comissiong. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Decision 2018 Countdown. We have Lesley Comissiong with us. It's 13 days to go before Election Day. And earlier in the show, we talked about the senatorial races, and we compared the 2016 races with the 2018 primaries so far, because those are the only figures we have. This time we're going to talk about the gubernatorial race. Now, Lesley, while you and I were talking during the break, we talked about how in the 2014 election, there weren't as many really people running. Now we have 7 running in this election. In the 2014 election, we had 5, but really 3 of them were kind of non-starters, I was
Correct.
saying. It was really between Mapp and Christensen. But now in the 2018 election, we have 7 people running. Kenneth Mapp and Albert Bryan are said to be the favorites. Of course, other candidates disagree with that.
Of course.
And then also we have these senators who just decided to give up their seat and run against the incumbent for this election. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, the amount of challengers that we have is indicative of the overall dissatisfaction that the community has had with the present administration. If you're doing a great job, you know that your chances of getting elected are not that good. You don't go up against a powerful incumbent because the incumbency has natural advantages that come with it in any political office. And so that can be a tough challenge as an outsider coming in. But of the individuals that are running this time, you have candidates and individuals who have run for governor before. In Lauren
Donna
Mosler, Donna Stork, Soraya Diassi. So these are all individuals.
Melito Smith, too.
Melito Smith, exactly. So you have 4 individuals that have run for public office before, have run for governor before. So this is either their second, third, or even in the case of former Senator Donna Stork, the 4th time they're running for governor. It's, I guess, the old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
No matter how unlikely it is.
Well, you know what? I think that, to be honest, some individuals insert themselves into the race because they may feel their chances increase with each time they run. If you look at someone like Warren Mosler, who has also run for Congress before, I think that if you continually see a slight increase in the number of votes that you get, you keep on saying, well, I'll keep on trying until I can finally get there, although he said that this is his last time running for office.
And every time you run, it's like, you know, it's like campaigning for the next time that you run.
Correct.
And that, of course, there's the advantage. You were talking about the advantage of the incumbent, and Governor Mapp certainly has taken advantage of that. We've been seeing like an uptick in press conferences and just, you know, projects that are being worked on that are fully visible to the public. And you know, people say, understandably, that this might be because he's running for re-election and he wants to show that, you know, things are working, and he's encouraging people not to change course. What do you think the impact of that is, this particular advantage against other people who are running against him?
Well, it certainly can sway some voters. I think especially voters that may have not decided as to who they're going to vote for. But in some of the polls that we've seen, there was an interesting number of undecideds. And the one thing, however, though, I think that some of this stuff should have been done earlier. If I was advising him, I would have said you needed to start the frequent press conferences, the action on projects much earlier, because if you are undecided at this point, you're more than likely not going to vote for a candidate. In political science, for the incumbent. If in political science they teach us that if you were going to do that, you would have already made up your mind. The majority of undecideds are looking for an alternative option. And so it's going to be interesting to see if any of that resonates with them. But you can't fault him for trying, and certainly he has these tools available to get his message out. And so I think that's what Virgin Islanders are seeing. It's up to them to decide whether they, you know, view this as a positive and or a negative.
And some folks also have the theory that there are so many people running this time, so that the dissatisfaction vote is split among different candidates to give a certain advantage to a certain political candidate. Do you agree with that, and how much of an impact do you think that'll make? Well,
I think that the only other race in Virgin Islands history where we've had this many candidates or more run was in 2002. And that was the case of Charles Turnbull being the incumbent running for a second term. And he managed to pull off the race without a runoff election, which most individuals projected there a runoff was inevitable. Now, it was awfully close. The runoff election was only avoided by less than 50 votes. I think it was 25 votes or so was the difference between the runoff and the general. So I think that if anything, I'm pretty confident in this race there will be a runoff, given the strength of the candidates, given the polling that we've seen that has been released to the public. I think a runoff is inevitable, and as usual, the top 2 finishers are going to go. And of course, the one who finishes number 1, I think if anything, the campaign should be trying to strive to be the number 1 finisher, because only once in Virgin Islands history has the second place finisher overtaken the eventual leader for the race in the runoff and won the governorship.
Wow. All right, so that's all the time we have for this segment. We talked about the senatorial race, comparing past and current elections, and we spoke about the gubernatorial race, also comparing the past election as well as with this one. Now, in the next segment, we're going to talk about Lesley's projections. I know she doesn't want to be put on the spot, so we have to kind of talk about how we want to present this. But we're going to look at the senatorial race and the gubernatorial race, and then we're also going to look at some figures in terms of voter turnout. So stick around. We'll be right back. You're watching Decision 2018 Countdown, and we're here with Lesley Comissiong. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Decision 2018 Countdown. We're here with Lesley Comissiong. Earlier in the show, we spoke about past and current elections in terms of the senatorial race and the gubernatorial race. So this time we're going to talk about Lesley's projections, but before that, we're going to look at some numbers that Lesley thinks are really important. We're looking at the voter turnout, the early voter turnout. So I think we have a graphic of that somewhere. Here's early voting on St. Thomas.
So what we see with early voting so far is that we're going to approach probably 10,000 plus voters, which would be roughly 20% of the registered voter population coming out even before Election Day. Wow. That is actually awesome, I think. I mean, as a lover of democracy, it's great to see people coming out, and especially coming off the heels of the 2014 election, where we had the lowest turnout in Virgin Islands history for a gubernatorial year.
Yeah.
It's especially good to see that the numbers are getting back to where they normally are. Now, Virgin Islanders have the distinction of being the jurisdiction in the United States with the highest turnout percentage on a per capita basis of any state or territory. We turn out to vote, and that is a great distinction. The national average is at about 40% or so. In our gubernatorial years, on average, we come out at anywhere between 65 to 67%. In some years, we've even hit 70%.
But you're
the
right,
last in 2014, we dropped to 54.35% in the general election, which I was very shocked by, and it actually I was concerned about. And if you look at the Senate race afterwards, the 2016 Senate race, there was also slightly depressed turnout. We had the special election with Janelle Sorrow. The turnout there was fairly low as well.
But the midterm elections usually are kind of a dip, right?
Well, midterms, yeah, but like I was saying, comparing gubernatorial year to gubernatorial year, 54.35% is a vast change from the turnout that we saw in 2010, which I believe we have that graphic as well, if they don't mind pulling that up. The 2010 percentage turnout was 66.57%. I have it here.
You're talking about the total.
Yes, for the general election in 2010. Right. So you can see here. Well, this is our early voter numbers that we're looking at right now. So right now, if you look at the overall turnout in early vote, St. Thomas right now leads with 54.28%. St. Croix has 41.60%, and St. John has 4.12% of the overall turnout, and so far 12.55% of all the registered voters in the territory have turnout, and that was of yesterday.
And we're still going.
And we're still going, exactly. We still have till on the 29th for early voting to be completed. So Carolyn Fox's goal of 10,000 voters is very easily attainable. I think they may even exceed that number. If you look at the individual turnout for each island of the votes that have come out, these are, you see the amount registered voters in the first column. St. Thomas, we have 24,677 votes. That's the highest amount in either of the district, and 6.81% of our voters have turned out. St. Croix, 24,342, 5.2% turnout. And St. John, believe it or not, with their 2,093 voters, have already had 12.61% of their voters turn out, which is fairly impressive. So good for you, St. John.
All right, so we're looking at that. We're also, but that's still bound to increase, you know, as we go forward, right?
Absolutely. Those numbers will go up this afternoon as soon as the numbers for today's voting are released. Now, we're looking at the amount of registered voters that we've had in 2010, 2014, and now in 2018. In 2010, and 2014, there were more registered voters then than there are now. And I would attribute that to the loss of population after the storms. While some people have come back to the territory,
wow.
It is clear that enough people have left the territory, and so those numbers have gone down. And while the goal was to get to 50,000 and it was exceeded, I think we were dwindling at about 48,000, 48,000 before the election. So good job to get some new voters on the rolls. But if you see the turnout percentages, as we were saying before, in 2010 we had a typical very healthy turnout, 66.57%, but that drop in 2014 to 54.35% is of interest. And what we do, political scientists, we kind of take an average, and then you factor in other things like the population loss that we've had, voter interest, the amount of candidates that are running. Based on the numbers that I've done my calculations, I think that we won't get back to that 66.57%, but we're going to be at somewhere around, I would say, 61 and 63%. That's what I'm going with for this election.
Okay, so let's take a look at your projections for the senatorial race and the gubernatorial race. I don't know how you want to do this. I don't want to put you on the spot. So what are we looking at for the senatorial race?
Well, for the senatorial race, typically, you don't have that many wild cards. The individuals that have ran in the Democratic primary, I think the first three finishers are almost guaranteed to make it into the big dance. But then you have some...
Just the first three, you think?
Just the first three. I mean, I think they're almost, rest assured, in each district, those individuals are probably shoo-ins.
They're good.
Then you have 9 other members. And it's a mix between some of the incumbents, and I think there were only 5 remaining incumbents after individuals either decided not to run or run on other gubernatorial tickets left in the Senate. And so you're looking at Myron Jackson, which is the Senate president,
you think
running for re-election. There's a possibility there, but then there's also the history that Senate presidents tend to not do very well the following year after their term because of all the time and attention that has to be paid to running the legislature. And so sometimes the Senate presidency has been avoided by certain senators because they don't want to run the risk of not getting elected. So I know Myron Jackson probably has a tough road in front of him, but he has traditionally been a top vote getter. So I would say that, I would lean to him possibly getting reelected. You have challengers like incumbent like Gene Ford, however, who finished 7th in the, I would definitely say that his seat is up for grabs. There's a possibility that he may get back in, but finishing that low in the Democratic primary is a cause for alarm.
And that's the same for St. Croix as well?
I would say that's the same. And then you have Kenny Gittens, who is a former senator running for office again, who has a natural base of voters that they're bringing in. You have Javon James, who's a newcomer. He seems to have a very interesting following. But I think in St. Croix, looking at Kurt Violet, Novelle Francis,
who are tied.
Yes, correct. I think those individuals are definitely shoo-ins for the re-election. And then you have some serious new challengers that are also in the mix. Some former senators, people like Senator Liliana Belardo de O'Neill, who has run for office before and is a well-known commodity in St. Croix that may play a factor in the race over there. So it's going to be an interesting mix of folks.
What about for the gubernatorial race?
Well, that's the one that everybody wants to know who's going to win. And of course, the only poll that matters is the poll on election day. But I think that based on what we've seen so far, and polling that I've seen, the 2 candidates that seem to be leading the pack are the incumbent governor, Kenneth Mapp, and the first-time challenger, the Democratic nominee, Mr. Albert Bryan. And so I think that that is going to be the 2 candidates heading to a runoff. And
how sure are you of the runoff?
If I were to, how sure am I of the runoff? I would put my runoff possibilities at over 90%. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm almost certain there's inevitability of a runoff. I don't see either candidate managing to do this in one turn, only because you have such a strong potential third place candidate in former Senator Adela Donistor, who has run for governor several times. He has a very formidable running mate in Alicia Chucky Hansen on St. Croix. And so I think that there are votes there that could have, if they weren't a factor, we may have not had a runoff, but I think that splits the votes enough to cause a runoff.
Fonzie makes it impossible to get to the 50% plus one.
Yeah, the 50% plus one threshold is a very difficult threshold to get to. I mean, if you just on raw numbers, we have 51,000 registered voters. You're looking at close to 50. You would have to get close to 26,000 votes to make this happen. You'd have to get 25,000, just over 25,000 rather, not 26,000, to make it happen. And I just don't, if you look at prior results, we have them right here. For instance, Governor Mapp only got 12,108 votes in the last gubernatorial year. Donna Christensen got 10,173 votes. If you even combine the both of them, you don't get to the 25,000
And that's when you didn't have really strong contenders after them.
So if you look at Soraya Diassi, who's also in the race again, last election she did 1,837. She may be projected to be even stronger this race. You factor that in, Senator Donistor and Warren Mosler, who's also run for governor before. I think it's inevitable we have a runoff.
Wow, so there you go. I hope I didn't put you on the spot.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so again, this is Decision 2018 Countdown. We had Lesley today just talking about, we compared current and past elections, senatorial race, gubernatorial race, and then she gave you her projections. We're hoping to have more of that analysis next week, where we're hoping to have Lesley back with Dr. Alexander Randall. But also, she was talking about the early voting turnout, and that's still going. So we want to remind you that you can still go to vote early, and on St. John, that date actually was October 23rd, so no chance there. But on St. Croix and St. Thomas, you can still go to the election offices until October 29th. They're open Saturday and Sunday, so if you only have the weekend, make sure you go out there and vote. They're open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the different election offices on all three.
Well, just a correction, April. I know that early voting has been extended on St. John. That press release came out today from Caroline Fox. So St. John has been doing so well, and as we saw in the graphic, 12%. They've turned out better than anybody else so far. So she extended early voting because of the number of individuals that have been coming out. So early voting will end for St. John on the 29th as well.
So so now we're ending early voting all at the same time.
Correct.
Okay, great. So October 29th is the last day to vote for all three districts, that St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. Again, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and they are open on Saturday and Sunday, so please make sure you get out and have your voice heard. On St. Croix, it's at the Sunny Isle Annex, Unit 4, St. Thomas Lockhart Gardens Shopping Center, and on St. John, it is at the Marketplace Suite 2. So make sure you go out there and vote. You were watching Decision 2018 Countdown with Lesley Comissiong. I'm April Knight. Please make sure you watch and tune in Mondays through Thursdays at 7 p.m. via Channel 4 and 504 HD, and also we're streaming this live on Facebook, so we hope you tune in. Thanks again for joining us. This is Decision 2018 Countdown.